salutations. Welcome to the show. You are listening to Keeping It Real from Wannabe Critic Productions. I am Gabriel Fast, and I'm your host today. Today, we're going to be reviewing Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock. And joining me is Ethan Maestri. This man, my fellow friend, the biggest Star Trek not nerd, but geek. You know a lot about.
Nerd.
Yeah,
it's
you're
nerd.
a Star Trek nerd.
Full on Star Trek nerd. Yes,
we've reviewed the first couple of films together, which have been it's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed it, and I found myself after the second movie being like, I want to know what happens next.
Which shocked me. It shocked me. You actually seem to be enjoying a little bit of this overarching arc for these movies.
I was pleasantly surprised by this film too.
Okay. Oh, I definitely had early.
Yeah, I definitely have a lot of things to say, but I just wanted to get it out there that I do like this movie and I'm excited to talk about it. I think it's interesting and I want to know what you think about it. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, this is the point where Ethan realized, like, oh, this is going to be an interesting podcast.
This is going to be an interesting discussion, I can tell.
Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've been reviewing the first couple of Star Trek movies, and if you're like myself and didn't know very much about Star Trek, the first movie, the motion picture, was a really big deal because the show had been done for how long, Ethan? Almost 10 years?
It had been off the air since, 68? Was the or 69 was the last season. Yeah.
And the first film came out
67, 68. Yeah. 3 seasons, first film in 79. So a decade later.
Yeah. A decade later, which is wild to think about. Could you imagine if we had let's just say the first Iron Man movie and we didn't have another Iron Man movie for another 10 years?
Yeah.
That'd be wild.
Would be nuts.
That would be wild. I honestly like Star Trek in its time. Like, kind of, I was watching, I'm like, man, this kind of was like one of the things, like the Avengers, or, like, it's like, oh, there's a new thing out. And I was watching some of the, the fight scenes towards the end of the film, and I'm like, I think I get it now. Like, I think I understand why people love Star Trek so much. And, which is interesting because I feel like this film is like, it can't not be polarizing. You know what I mean? Like, it's a weird movie.
Yeah.
It's a weird movie.
There are basically two camps in the Star Trek fandom. People that like Star Trek 3, people that do not like Star Trek 3. And you're not going to find anybody in between. I mean, really, if they say they are hardcore, they love the original series, they love the Kirk, Spock, McCoy dynamic, you're not going to find anybody in that middle ground with an indifferent opinion on Star Trek 3. It's love it or hate it.
Well, it did kind of strike me as like, I was watching it and it kind of gave me vibes. I was like, this kind of feels like The Last Jedi to me. Like, if there was a Last Jedi, it feels like it would be this movie. Am I kind of,
You're not wrong. I am deeply offended that you would use that as an illustration.
I'm sorry,
but you know how to trigger me, Gabe.
I'm sorry.
It's to be expected.
I'm so sorry.
I'm like water off a duck's back or a targ's back, as this movie had in it. This was the introduction to the targs. Yeah, this is where they showed up in Star Trek lore. But anyway, I can see where you're going with that as an illustration, and I'm not going to disagree with that assessment.
I mean, it's like, sorry, I got to take a B reel really quick, so I just took it. You're forever solidified. On the B reel, I feel like this was one of those movies where, to me, I just kind of felt like whenever people get together, for some reason, I kind of went to video games because I went into playing a game right after I finished the movie, just kind of like, trying to process it. And I was like, when you make a piece of art, I feel like there's people that want it to be very technically, sound and impressive, and, you want it to be cutting edge so that it can set the precedent for what's to come, right? And I feel like in a lot of ways, this movie did that tenfold more than Wrath of Khan did. This is a way more exciting movie. Visually, action-wise, like, The Klingons, I mean, Christopher Lloyd as what is his name? Kruge. I loved him. I thought
Commander
that was
Krug.
Krug. I loved it.
But just a year before he shows up as Doc Brown.
That's so weird to think about.
That's crazy to think about.
Yeah, but
I'm thinking of under that big forehead and long hair.
Yeah.
There's a big puffy gray. No, that was a wig, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, I feel like there's people that want it to be very technically impressive, which the makeup was incredible. Like, are the Klingons kind of known as being literally the ugliest things I've ever seen in my entire freaking life? Because
no, this was only the second time the Klingons had shown up with that makeup. Before, in the original TV series, there were no ridges or anything like that. It was just eye makeup, and that was about it, just to kind of make them look more devilish. But this was the second movie in which the ridges, and then they started diversifying the ridges to indicate like some genetic differences and things like that.
Different mustaches and things like that. I noticed that.
Yeah. And the uniforms obviously are in this movie what we now will associate with the Klingon culture and the Klingon Defense Force, basically, throughout the coming Star Trek Generation series, right? I mean, the Klingons here are what you see Picard taking on in Next Generation. And this was kind of the genesis of it. See what we did there. But there's a lot of firsts that happen in this movie for me as a fan, I have an affinity for this movie because it was kind of one of the first ones that I got air quotes, and that struck a chord with me of, I really like this universe. I can remember the whole scene with stealing the Enterprise was kind of inspirational for me as a child. And my brother and I both loved that sequence, and I would build the Enterprise out of Legos and he would build the Excelsior out of Legos, and we would just run around the house chasing each other,
right,
like the starships, and it was just one of those defining moments as a kid associated with this movie. And like it or hate it, it doesn't matter to me. It transcends whether or not this is a good film. It makes me happy to hear you say you enjoyed it. Is it a good film? You could probably pick that apart. I don't care.
Yeah.
Because for me, the nostalgia is strong with this one. And it's always going to have a good place in my heart.
I just feel like the delivery is something akin to like, oh my God, this is going to split the fan base, like The Last Jedi. But the content of it is almost like Return of the Jedi-esque. Like, it's very, I mean, just the symbolism. And are we going to talk about the fact that it was directed by Leonard Nimoy? Who
it was.
After seeing this film,
movie,
I had a whole new respect for not only Leonard Nimoy, but for Star Trek in general, because I was like, oh my God, this is the first time this world has ever made sense to me, where it's like been palatable to the point where it's like, oh my God, like I see the appeal here. And I'll tell you what did it for me was Saavik, right? Or Saavik. How do you pronounce her name?
Saavik.
Yeah. So she's also Vulcan. And after, Kirk's son dies, just the expressionless, emotionless, like, oh, he's died, Yeah. Being unable to express emotion. Like, I don't know why, but to me that just really stood out. Like, I loved that. They nailed it. Like, in that moment, because I was sad. I was like, holy crap, and of course, Kirk's in the
Kirk was just hugging this dude.
Yeah,
in the
exactly.
Last movie.
Just 2 seconds ago, and even had some. He talked to him in this movie as well, I think, right?
Yeah, a little bit on the comm there.
And it's like, even though it was estranged, like even though their relationship was estranged, you could tell it's like that's your flesh and blood. And what does he say? Is like, you bastard, like you killed my son. He says it like 4 times.
Oh yeah,
and that's kind of there's just this like blend of sci-fi and stagecraft that's like perfect in this movie. And it's like I found myself comparing it to like Alec Guinness's performance in A New Hope. Like, when did we make the transition from like classically trained actors and like this very like proper way of going about art to now it's kind of like, okay, lasers and all this other stuff. And from what I've seen of the Next Generation and that crew, it's like they do kind of keep the same vibe, or the same attitude rather, but just with different people. But it's like you can kind of tell in this movie, like they totally went for more of like the fantastical elements of, it has to go beyond just being science. It's like, yes, this is a scientific thing. Like I was worried that was going to get kind of weird, like with Spock's soul and all this other stuff, like blah blah blah. But it's really not. Like,
yeah, they kept it rooted in the science of the fiction.
Yeah, and I mean, Genesis, it would make sense. Like if Genesis needed a life form to kind of like cling on to, see what I did there? Like to create, to be created in this like giant planet, it would make sense that since Spock was right there, that he would have been kind of a catalyst for that. So therefore he's attached to it.
Yeah.
And I thought there was just, man, there's just a lot to unpack with this one, man. Like,
okay, so before we get to really seriously unpacking, should we, for the benefit of the audience, give a short synopsis? So what we pick up immediately after the events that ended Wrath of Khan. And so the Marcuses have left the Enterprise. The Enterprise is has made emergency repairs and is very slowly, apparently, making its way back to Earth in order to make more extended repairs to the ship and get it refitted. But they quickly learn that the Enterprise is to be decommissioned. The crew is all going to get shuffled off. Scotty is immediately reassigned to a brand new ship. And Kirk is left with his friend McCoy, who is now beginning to exhibit some mental instability. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And Kirk is now forced to steal the Enterprise when he learns that he needs to take both McCoy, Spock's trapped Katra in McCoy's brain, and he has to retrieve the body of Spock, bring them to Vulcan so that they can be, for lack of a better term, laid to rest properly. And as they go to the Genesis planet to retrieve Spock, lo and behold, the Klingons have learned of the Genesis project. A rogue commander has brought his ship and crew there and has created havoc. The planet is unstable and is going to explode. Spock was miraculously reborn on the planet when it was in flux during its formation. And they get Spock off the planet. The planet explodes. They take him to Vulcan. They merge McCoy's marbles with Spock, and Spock's alive.
That concept.
And that's the movie.
So listen, I'm a weeb, okay? I watch a lot of anime. This concept of Spock taking his consciousness and letting McCoy borrow it, knowing that there might be a chance, being that smart, that there might be a chance that they could mind meld. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Let McCoy do this thing. There is so much pop culture that takes that idea.
Yeah.
Like there are literally movies about someone taking their consciousness and uploading it so that they can, stay immortal. I mean, it's obviously like it's been done, but to have it done so long ago.
It's a deep well, that sci-fi concept's been around for a little while, even longer than this movie. But just
I guess I had never seen it in a setting that wasn't modern for me.
Okay. Yeah.
In my worldland. So it was like to see this idea perpetuated.
Your introduction to it came in more recent works.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it's like to see at least it's kind of the same deal. It's like, oh, without Elvis, you don't get the Beatles, and without the Beatles, you don't get basically every band ever to exist. It's like, this is just a step in me furthering my sci-fi knowledge, and it's like, wow. Because who wrote this one? Who wrote the third movie?
Okay, so this one, this
that
movie kind of has a weird lineage.
Yeah. Okay.
Harv Bennett, who was the key producer for Wrath of Khan, he basically puts the franchise on his shoulders because the studio did not trust Gene Roddenberry to come up with movie concepts. He had his shot with motion picture, and in the studio's opinion, it was a kind of a miss.
I'm sorry.
So at this point,
pause right there.
Okay.
We gave a lot of glowing credit to motion picture. We did. We were very positive about it.
Mm-hmm.
For its time.
Yes.
But
It's very high concept sci-fi.
It is. And if they had millions of dollars of budgeting to where they could fully flesh out the ideas even for its time, because it's very difficult for me to take like a movie like that and compare it to 2001, which to me feels very primitive, and be like, 2001 did a way better sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
Like conceptually, and like if you were really trying to make it about the effects, like Avatar, like as of recording this right now, Avatar Way of Water is in theaters.
Mm-hmm.
Visually it's incredible, and like the ideas in it are incredible, but it's just okay. And I think that's what we just both need to be on the same page, like as fans, because I'm going to consider myself a Star Trek fan now. As fan, I'm glad, like that's really some of the first Star Trek media I have consumed as an adult. Like that's what made me want to keep going.
Yeah.
So to me, it's like, I like it as a fan, but it's just an okay movie.
Okay.
How do you feel?
I get it. It's for me, it's a very good movie. It's one of the ones that I go back to and watch frequently.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for tuning in. No, just kidding.
But no, and as I said on our review of it, I get it that not everyone can connect with it to the same level that I've connected with it.
Yeah.
That's just the way that's people's personality.
Well, and I guess I feel like I liked the first movie a lot, but after Wrath of Khan and now this movie, I'm like, man, why would I ever watch the first movie again? And
see, I don't go there.
I do. Like I just feel like, and I just don't feel the need really to experience that first story. I'll watch Wrath of Khan, I'll watch Wrath of Khan and this movie together probably for the rest of my life, because man, like if they would have led with this movie and then had 3 be 2, imagine the plot for like their Wrath of Khan moment. Like imagine how much better that moment would have been like in later subsequent films, which of course I haven't seen 4 or 5 yet. But I'm like, imagine if we had our Wrath of Khan like Spock death moment after the fact. After like 2 really like solid movies. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I don't want to derail I've been drinking, of course, so I get really chatty. But I don't want to derail this conversation too much. So continue.
No, but to your question earlier, who wrote the movie? Well, Harv Bennett came up with a lot of the concepts that were outlined in Wrath of Khan. He puts the franchise on his back and writes this movie, Star Trek 3. And he also has to lobby very hard to get Leonard Nimoy to be involved in it, because it's famously, it's well published that when Wrath of Khan finished and it was revealed Leonard Nimoy, his character Spock, was dead, Leonard Nimoy was done with the franchise. He was done. He was not going to inhabit the Spock character anymore. He was happy, and he was going to move on to a directing career. That's what he wanted to do. In very short order, he could not get the projects that he wanted. And so Harv Bennett comes to him and says, hey, we want you back for Star Trek 3. And Leonard Nimoy says, I will only consider it if you let me direct the movie. And that's what happened.
No way.
So that is how it went down. That's why Leonard Nimoy is directing this movie. That was his stipulation for being brought back to life as Spock.
So that is the weirdest thing I've ever heard, because this movie could very much be construed as being self-indulgent for Leonard Nimoy. I'm like, wow, Leonard Nimoy is really like full of himself here. Like to me, it was like a puff piece.
He did not want to be a part of the Star Trek franchise anymore.
That makes so much sense, because I feel like there was a layer of objectivity missing from the first 2 movies.
Yeah.
A layer of, imagine no one has seen this before. Imagine this isn't for the fans. Imagine you're trying to make new fans.
Mm-hmm.
And for someone like me, who could not have cared less about Star Trek, I'm like, you guys are freaking nerds. And this is not as good as Star Wars. It's only taken a couple of things, and this was the linchpin where I'm like, okay. Like as soon as Search for Spock was done, I was like, I'm ready to watch the next one. And then I got super excited because...
Hang on to that excitement. It's going to need to hold you through a couple. So
Oh God. Okay. Why wouldn't
Not
they
to
just
tip my
get?
hand,
Why
but
wouldn't they just
there
get
you go.
Leonard Nimoy to? Because I mean, so you were there during this time, right? Whenever this came out.
Yeah, I was when this movie came out. I would have been 7.
Old.
Yeah, I was about 7 years old.
Old.
Yeah, no, yeah, 6 or 7, something like that.
Okay.
So,
but
I
you grew up
didn't
with
go
this
to the
movie.
theater to see it.
Right,
Yeah,
but
I
you grew up with
it.
it. Okay, so
Yeah.
that's kind of like how me. I always liked Return of the Jedi more as a kid because of the Ewoks, obviously, and it was just more,
Mhm.
you know, it was more blockbustery, and that's kind of how this felt. Honestly, there's a
Yeah.
moment I was like, whenever Christopher Lloyd is like, "Oh, you know, they're on Genesis," he's like, "Beam me up," and you know, he has some dialogue with Kirk. We never saw him get beamed up ever.
Yeah.
But we know he did. And I was able to put myself in 1983 or whatever, you know, whenever this came out. When did this come out? 83? 84.
84.
1984. I was like, I didn't even have to think about that as a watcher because I know that that's what they do in the show. Like, I know that's a thing. So it wasn't even a question. It was like, oh, yeah, when's he going to show up?
Yeah.
And it was just it's so interesting watching these blockbustery type films retrospectively because you can see the format is there, but you can very clearly see the technology and where it's at, you know, and like, I don't know, man, like this just really struck a chord with me. I really liked this movie a lot.
Well, okay, so here again, we come back to the fact that Paramount did not give this to a full cinematic crew. This is yet again a TV crew, basically. Everything's on sound stages. There were no
Which
location
makes sense.
shots.
Which makes sense
Yeah.
to my comment about the last review whenever I said stagecraft, because this does,
Yes,
bro. It feels
Yeah.
like a
Well,
play.
Okay, so this movie to me, and this may be a bold statement for some that love Star Trek, and if you hate it, whatever, I'm saying it.
This is Wannabe
This
Critic
movie,
Productions,
to me-
biatch.
So wrap your mind around this. This movie, more than any other movie to me in the franchise of the original crew, is most like an episode of original Star Trek, the original
Dude, okay,
TV show.
I had
Because all of it's on a soundstage. They have to make do with very small sets, but they have to sell you on big concepts. And for the most part, they do it. The Genesis planet looks a little wonky in places. I'll grant you that. But it was all on a small soundstage.
but for its time, what reminded me, it's like, wow, this feels like a grandiose episode of Star Trek.
Yeah.
The Enterprise got destroyed at the end, like
Because everything they're doing in this movie is what Next Generation did for the first at least 3 seasons.
well, and you know what I feel like too. It's like I see a lot of similarities between this movie and Galaxy Quest.
Yeah.
You know, especially with
Yeah.
like the captains like kind of having their back and forth, and I was like, oh, which by the way, as part of this project, we will be covering Galaxy Quest.
That makes me happy to hear that. Yes.
Where we will be covering
I'm there for
Galaxy
that.
Quest, and I would love to get one Ryan Mazzacco in on maybe reviewing
I think that could happen.
that movie and the Orville potentially. I'm for the long term, I'm thinking the Orville because it's like I want to have all this context before I even entertain the idea.
Season 3 of Orville is amazing.
I've heard
Yes.
such good things about the show, but I've
Mhm. I'm a
literally
believer.
I've stayed away.
I bought in.
I've stayed
bought
away
in.
from Star Trek adjacent content because I don't know anything about the world.
Mhm.
I saw Nemesis whenever I was a kid. That's the only thing I ever saw. Like, so
You saw the worst one.
Star Trek, but I liked that movie.
Yeah, I'm
like-
sure you did.
Like as a kid, I remember like the first 10 minutes, like this council, I'm like, government, like there's people, like what's
Yeah.
going on? And they turned to stone. I remember being like, I don't know what's going on, but this is cool, and
Yeah.
I want to keep going. I want to keep going with
Yeah.
whatever this is. So I saw a lot of a lot of similarities between this movie and Galaxy Quest, and I had a thought of like, why doesn't this movie get more attention? And as I'm watching, I'm like, man, why does this is a good movie? Like this is the type of movie. This is the Return of the Jedi. It's like Christopher Lloyd, this bombastic, really, I mean, honestly, really good performance.
Yeah.
Kirk is better in this movie than he is in the last movie.
Thank you.
He's better.
I will say this. Here's the thing. This Kirk was far more like television TOS Kirk than any of the previous 2 movies that we've gotten. And this was his line delivery. He had that halting William Shatner line delivery, and that has kind of been missing for a while.
I thought I was watching an episode of Family Guy. I was like, I see now why Family Guy makes fun of this guy, and like,
but that's such a Kirk mannerism, and it was so gratifying to see it on the big screen.
Bastard, like, you know, like the pause, like, because I am a huge theater nerd. I love the theater. I absolutely love the theater. And whenever I like go to a play, we have season tickets. We go to the theater often. Like, this isn't thing. It's like, oh, Gabe's trying to say he likes plays to be cool. No, I really genuinely like the theater. We go regularly because I hate to say it, but whenever you see a really good play, it just outshines the best movie you've ever seen because there's something to be said about being in the moment. And there's something that captured me with these past 2 films we've watched about these characters feel like they're on a stage. Like, they feel like they're on a stage. And, you know, it's a strange thing because...
you take that moment there at the very end where all that's happening, all the camera is doing is just following with Leonard Nimoy as he walks in front of every member of the cast, and they make eye contact. And these people, they are great actors, and you get to see the facial expressions, and they all inhabit a different role in their reaction. Savick looks at him, makes contact, and then looks at the ground. Scotty looks at him like, do you remember me?
Yeah.
You know, every single one of them have a moment. And then Leonard Nimoy and Kirk square off and have that dialogue there at the very end. It's very much like watching an intimate production on a stage.
It is, and it's, you know, it's one of those things too. Like, I'm a big symbolism guy. Like, in high school, I really, because symbolism, it sneaks in there. That's what's great about symbolism is, like, if you want to take an idea about something and it's like, wow, this is making me uncomfortable. Many people do not have the powers that be or whatever to like actually understand why they feel that way. And this movie, as being a part of, like, to me, this is like sci-fi royalty. I mean, there's so much symbolism, and really there's a lot of symbolism in sci-fi in general, which makes it so brilliant, you know, as a medium for storytelling, because you don't think, you're like, oh, you think nerd, like, oh, this is sci-fi, this is nerdy. Well, that's the whole point. It's like, yeah, we want you to think. I never really realized this. We want you to think that this is nerdy because you're so low-minded, you're not actually going to understand the story we're trying to tell.
Yeah.
And that's not to be elitist. That is just a fact of the matter. To be in geek culture and nerd culture, there is an expectation that is like required of you. And I feel like the majority of people that watch this movie would not see it for what it actually is. They would just see it at face value, which is not a good movie. I'm sorry. Like, I will say it as someone who sees symbolism and sees deeper meaning behind things. I can say there's tons of that. There's tons of heart here. There's tons of methodical, like, thought out, like, oh, you know, fans are going to like this, but they're not going to know why. At the same time, it's like there's going to be a lot of people that probably watched this in a time and thought that this was a step down from the last film.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, they did.
You know,
the reviews were not as glowing for this movie when it
if you take this,
Khan.
And that's great, because if a reviewer, you know, as someone who has consumed a lot of media and like reviewed a lot of things, you know, not near as much as many people who do it professionally, but it's like you have to get to a point where you can see something at face value. And anything that you might feel, quote unquote, that's personal. Like, that is where the subjectivity comes in. It's like, if you are touting a movie because of X, Y, and Z, and it's because of something you feel personally, okay, whatever. It's another thing to say like, oh, I actually know how movies are made, and this is incredible. This is not a great movie by like movie standards. Like I think it has some good dynamic shooting. Like especially
the ILM effects again carry a lot of the storytelling.
For sure. The drama.
Like I said, that the stealing the Enterprise out of space dock was like, I mean, that's just great ship stuff. I mean, it's just great. It is great.
Kirk's ship, literally. Like,
yeah.
And
the exploding of the Enterprise there, spoiler alert if you haven't watched it, but the Enterprise gets destroyed in this movie, which kicks off a lot of tropes about Star Trek destroying the Enterprise, but whatever. That's a great scene.
It is
charged with a lot of emotion as the remaining crew members are standing there on the surface watching the thing burn across the sky. I mean, you talk about symbolism. There's a lot there to enjoy.
Yeah, for sure. Pause right there. Don't let me forget that thought. I got to pee again.
Okay.
So I wanted to kind of segue, at that point you're talking about specifically with the crew seeing, Krug, he definitely had the upper hand here. He seemed to be the more commandeering captain. It's like all this, this crew is a bit of a has-been crew and yada, yada, yada. Like Klingons are known for being warriors, right? So that pride, and I see like very similar attributes in the Klingons to a sci-fi series that I'm really sci-fi slash fantasy series that I'm really into, which is Dragon Ball. I see a huge similarity between the Klingons and the Saiyans. Very prideful, very emotional, but it's like repressed emotion. It's the insecurity. It's the need to want to be better, but you don't know why. You don't know why you want to be better. You just do. You want to be the best. And it's the need to want to be better that really aligns them and makes them similar. And it was really interesting seeing, the depiction of the crew. It's like they are a well-oiled machine. And, immediately, unequivocally, you have to take the Klingons seriously. Like, they're inherently interesting, especially as someone who loves action adventure. It's like, oh my God, I would kill to have a game where I could play as like a Klingon bounty hunter. Like, that would be incredible. But, it's interesting to see how our heroes who, that's kind of the whole point is like, Kirk and crew represent the humans. They represent the human race. They represent everything that as being a sentient being. And they're outsmarting the competition. Well-seasoned, fighters, warriors. And it's like, yeah, we know we can't beat you in a fist fight, but it's, I kind of think about it. It's like, if a football team could beat the other team just with field goals, they would.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what Kirk did here. He is like, you know what? To save my crew, to actually win, I have to sacrifice the ship. Because guess what? This is a schematic. The ship can be rebuilt. This is not a failure. This is actually just the next step. And as I saw that happen, I was like, and then, this kind of segues more into the deeper symbolism. I feel like whoever wrote this had the intent of Star Trek fans at heart.
Oh, yeah.
The fan base as a whole, because you see this classic, formula of a Star Trek episode. And it reminded me as, at least the structure of the most recent Star Trek film that we had, which was Beyond Darkness or whatever. Kind of like having this planet and having some, it seemed like they were definitely trying to mirror things that were in Search for Spock. And Search for Spock does it 100 times better with worse effects, because it's actually, you can actually feel the performances and you can feel the nostalgia and you can feel things there because it does have something established. It does mean something. And it's sad if Star Trek fans specifically dislike this movie, like I feel bad for them because this was literally made for you. It's the idea that Star Trek was a ship going down as a whole, got revived 10 years later with the motion picture. And it's almost like, hey, we're not done because after this, there's 2 more movies and we get the Next Generation. It's almost like whoever wrote and directed this movie, Nimoy executed
three more movies after this one.
Nimoy directed the next couple.
No. There's just after Star Trek 3, you've got 4, 5, and 6 with the original crew still.
Gotcha. Yeah, exactly. So it's almost like, hey, we're not going anywhere. We're giving you more of this. And at the time, they probably didn't know that it was going to expand beyond the original series. But just to know, it's like, hey, Spock being a key part of this thing being gone, you can't do it after that, especially like after the tumultuous journey it's had before then. You cannot have Star Trek without Spock. So you might argue that this is the most important Star Trek movie that has ever been released.
Ooh, that's a bridge too far, I think.
Without Spock, do you really think without Spock, do you have the tenure and the it's not tenure, but the pedigree? Does Star Trek have the pedigree that it has today? Which, sorry, it isn't even as close as high as it should be because of whatever reason. But does it have the same pedigree without this movie?
I would argue that if you left Spock behind at the end of 2, but the crew continued to make movies, Star Trek probably would not have achieved the level of pop culture presence that it had by the time you hit peak Next Generation, which is around 1990, 91, which would have been about the time of the 25th anniversary of Star Trek. So I don't think you would have been at the same level. But I think if we're talking about Star Trek today, you will not have the treatments of Spock that I think actually take away from Star Trek now that we're seeing Paramount releasing in the series that are being done right now. There wouldn't be this cult of Spock that seems to exist around that character now. I think that cult of Spock has always been there. It's been there since the 60s. People have always loved that character. But I don't think it would have reached the same level that we see now, and everything being so Spock storyline centric the way we're seeing today. And that's what's happening to me in Star Trek. Yeah,
that kind of goes to my next thing then. Is Spock responsible then for the ever polarizing progression of this series? Because I'm going to be straight with you. I gravitate more towards Star Trek now because of Spock. Because it's that one person that it's like someone says that they did something that was freaking idiotic, and the nice person, Kirk, is going to be like, well, you really shouldn't have done that, but it's okay. Spock's going to be like, no, it's not okay, actually. You're an idiot, and you shouldn't be here.
I guess, I guess what I'm saying is if they had let Spock die in Wrath of Khan, come up with another movie, I don't know. I hate to have to backpedal. You're making me backpedal here. So I will grant you that this movie was successful enough. This movie was successful enough that shortly after its release, they immediately began writing the 4th movie, and along with it, more seriously talking about a future television show, rebooting the franchise on television again, which became Star Trek: The Next Generation. If they had left Spock for dead, that might not have happened. You might have gotten 1, maybe 2 more movies,
and that would have been
Star Trek. That might have been it. It could have been it.
So
the problem being, because the fandom was so hung up on Spock, that series like Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager that came later and really blew the universe wide open. Apparently it didn't blow it wide open enough, because 30 years later, all the studio wants to do is tell Spock stories, Spock-centric stories, or stories with Spock in them. You look at the J.J. Abrams movies, you look at Discovery, you look at Strange New Worlds. It all centers around Spock. And sadly, we're not boldly going anywhere beyond one certain Vulcan. And this is me being on a soapbox as a fanboy, but I have the right. I've been at it for my entire life. But that's kind of how I feel about Spock. I love Spock as a character. He's a great character. There's other stories to be told. And I'm not getting those other stories because they're so centered on Spock.
Well, it's almost like how we can't let go of Luke Skywalker. You know, like Skywalker, everything is Skywalker centric. And it's you know, like it's a linchpin. Really, it is. It's like it's the easiest thing to gravitate towards from a money standpoint because it's the thing that most people know.
Yeah.
So that's why I say, you know, as a new Star Trek fan, it's like from these first 3 movies, not only this, I will tell you this is not the best movie out of the 3, but this is the movie that's going to make you feel the most.
It is.
By
it
far.
is. And it's gonna hook you into the universe.
It's just very relatable.
Like it have for you.
Yeah, it's very relatable. And I'll tell you one thing that I guarantee you was intentional by the writers. You know, what is Spock's rebirth, his coming to, in conjunction with Genesis, right? Genesis falling apart. What does that mean to you?
Well, we ended the show with new life. In the shadow of new life, we had death. Now we have death, but a new life comes from it, or life is reborn from it, from the ashes. That's what I'm seeing between those 2 movies.
Yeah, I agree, and I also think that what was the demographic for Star Trek
at the time?
At the time, what would you say?
There were young people that were definitely interested in it, but it was predominantly the 30 and 40-year-olds that were teen and 20-year-olds when it was being shown on television in homes in the 1960s.
What sex?
Male, predominantly.
Predominantly. Would you say that the male audience is predominantly responsible for Spock's success?
No.
Just be candid.
No, I think I don't know. I'm just going to say no, I don't feel it, but I'm not, I don't want to go into why I feel that way.
When I think of Spock, a legendary character, like whenever I think of Star Trek as a young person, as a kid, like single digits, I didn't know Star Trek. I knew who Spock was, though. Live long and prosper, right?
Yeah.
He is, for all intents and purposes, like most people's foray into that universe because they want to know who Spock is.
Yeah.
In this movie.
And it's so interesting that Gene Roddenberry conceived of him as he wanted to put the devil on screen to confront audiences and make them uncomfortable.
Well, which makes sense to me, honestly. Like, I truly believe that. And whenever I see Spock, I don't want to, like, it would be arrogant to say, like, oh, I see myself. That's not true. I see my deepest, darkest thoughts in some aspects. It's like, you're a freaking idiot.
Or the part that you hide.
The parts that
you hide from people.
The parts that you hide from people.
No, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now we go deeper. Those tweens, those 20-year-olds that watched 20 years before, they're in their 40s now. You're halfway through your life. You're watching Spock being representative of yourself as an adolescent, watching all of these things happening, grow into a man, this rapid aging. To me, I saw underlying themes of adolescence and how it feels sometimes to like fight for the things that you really love. And it's like Spock doesn't know what's happening to him at this time. You know, whenever the planet's like imploding all around him, he doesn't know why these things are happening. He doesn't know why he has these feelings that he has. And to me, it just spoke very personally to me. It's like I've always been ridiculed or like made fun of for the things that I enjoy. And it's like it's difficult to not want to impart ill will on those people that make you feel that way. And sometimes it does feel like a planet is exploding around you because it's like, why can't you understand why this thing is amazing? And I feel like just as someone who is new to this universe, it feels like just a subtle nod. It's like, look, you thought we were done. You thought this was over, but we're not going anywhere. You know? And to me, it's just very interesting to watch this happen in real time retrospectively. Because like, oh, like now I'm into it. Now I want to know. Now I see. Now Mass Effect makes so much more sense. Now all of, a lot of sci-fi starts to make more sense. And it's like, man, it just feels very, to say that this movie isn't important. Because I'm telling you right now, as the wannabe critic, I'm 27 years old. Without this movie, you don't have a new Star Trek fan. So how can it be insignificant? It's not. I promise you it's not. These first 3 movies are anything but insignificant. There is themes, perpetuated for the demographic, which is a lot of insecure dudes. I'm sorry. Like, a lot of insecure dudes who are afraid to say what everyone else is thinking. And that's exactly who Spock was. So, to me, it's like, I go back to that question. It's like, is this movie responsible, like, for a lot of things? And you even said yourself, like, yeah, you probably would have gotten a couple more movies, but that might have been it.
Yeah.
I do this, and I'm not arguing with anyone and saying like, oh, this is a good movie. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's important in the same way that Saving Private Ryan is important whenever you're in, history class and they want you to watch it. It's like, this is an important piece. It's like for Saving Private Ryan, it's an important piece of content for the country we live in. But this is an important piece of content for sci-fi. Like, I see so much stuff. Like, I mean, you said the thing, the design with the Klingons and things like that. Like, I don't know. I just don't know how you could argue that this isn't.
No,
probably the most.
I see what you're saying.
You know what I mean? Like it just feels like the make or break moment for Star Trek is. Does this movie do good or not? Or does this generate enough buzz? Does this generate enough questions? Does this generate enough hype to warrant us making more?
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right in that, because now that I'm thinking about it, yeah, obviously the Klingons, that's something that's going to carry forward through basically 4 television series, virtually unchanged. This movie sets the template for the Klingon culture going forward. And the U.S.S. Excelsior, the new ship that's in space dock that everybody's marveling at, that Scotty goes off to work on. That ship, that design, and you don't know this, but going forward to the next generation in that universe, that ship design is the backbone of the Federation of Starfleet for decades to come. Hundreds of years to come, and so you get that model in this movie, and it carries forward in show after show after that ship keeps showing up. Well, Sulu is going to be the captain of it here in just a few short years. So it's just, yeah, there's a lot in this movie that, and like I said, even for me as a small boy watching it, growing up with it, it wasn't that I just grew up with it in the house. It's just the fact that the concepts that it showed of that universe and the diversity of that universe, because we're not just seeing them in the big red maroon uniforms. We get to see them in casual clothes. They're people too, just like the rest of us. And there are things outside of the bridge of the U.S.S. Enterprise, and we get to see them in some of those environments. And I don't know, it opened up that world a little bit to me, so that as a little boy I could play with those spaceships and have fun. And then later it just fueled further love of that universe when I began more in Next Generation and further movies and things like that.
Yeah. And I mean, everything you're saying is just like, man, I just feel like this humanized the universe so much and made it so much more palatable. Like, as somebody, I don't know why, but whenever I was watching this movie, for some reason, whenever they were toasting their champagne glasses, It reminded me of the scene in Age of Ultron whenever everyone's celebrating. Like everyone's having a party. Yeah. Everyone's doing their thing. And it's like you have this element, and it's like we've been on top of the world. And as Star Trek existing, it's like we just made Wrath of Khan. Like, did you watch it? It's one of the greatest movies ever made. Like, it would be very easy to buy into the idea that like, oh, we're done. And as a creator, it's like I have a couple of videos that have, 15, 20,000 views on them. And it's like I'm scared to make something else because I'm worried it won't perform as well. So as a studio head, as someone who's thinking about what could potentially happen, this movie is that spark plug, dude. Like, whether you like it or hate it, I'm telling you, this is an integral part of the future of Star Trek moving forward. Without this movie, I probably would not care at all. And, it goes back to the old Kubrick saying of like, if I feel this way, there has to be someone else that feels this way. Mm-hmm. And that's why podcasting is so incredible because, there is definitely going to be people, because we're both pretty positive on this movie, but there's going to be people that completely feel the opposite, that hate every sort of symbolic thing that, symbolic treasure that you and I obviously are connecting over. And it's like, oh my God, like, I'm probably blowing your mind. It's like, oh my God, Gabe likes Star Trek now. Like, this is a new thing.
Well, having heard you for years say, Star Trek, that's an old man's show. It is gratifying to finally see you make the turn, and be like, there's something worthwhile about this.
It's special. I mean, to say it's not special is just dumb. I mean, if you say Star Trek is not special, then it's almost like since I'm part of the Star Trek community now, it's almost like, oh, well, you haven't watched it. Duh. Like, that's why.
Yeah. It doesn't matter, though. You found something that appeals to you.
Exactly. Like, to say that you're going to watch Star Trek and not find something that appeals to you, you have to be a serial killer if that's the case, because there is so much. I find the most. I mean, is it just me, or do the Klingons really represent the human psyche? Do the best you possibly can. Be the best you possibly can.
It's so funny that you're recognizing that, because the majority of people that I've heard poo-poo this movie, it's the Klingons that cause the problem. They don't view the Klingons in this movie as being the same Klingons that came out of the 60s television show. And I say, good, because the 60s Klingons were not great at all. These Klingons that we see in this movie are an alien. But you're right. They reflect that base nature that we all have within ourselves. And they found that and injected that into that culture for the better, because it made them an infinitely more interesting villain race.
Yeah, no, and I mean, that really is. I mean, whenever I saw, and Christopher Lloyd, man, like his presence in this movie is so good. I mean, he is a great bad guy. Like, because you can see, and I'm sorry, but this movie, to me, I like this. I like Wrath of Khan because it just feels iconic. But I like this movie more than I like Wrath of Khan, if I'm being honest.
You enjoyed this movie more than you've.
I enjoyed watching this movie more than I watched Wrath of Khan, and it's because
I get that.
Yeah, and it is because it's taking an idea. It's like sci-fi is so. It's like, oh yeah, in 1,000 years we'll be doing that. Like we'll be beaming each other up. That makes sense. But like, I don't know. There's just something about this movie that does a really good job of making me feel immersed. Whereas before in the other, any Star Trek content I've absorbed before, it's like, I feel like this could really have happened. Therefore, I feel less immersed. Whereas this movie had enough fantastical elements to it to where it's like, I don't know what's going to happen. Like, and I loved that feeling. And to me, this encapsulates the feeling of what you want to do when you go to a movie. When you go to the cinema, this is like, you don't want to be able to predict what happens next, because I annoy my wife all the time. She actually told me to stop. It's like, I can watch a movie for 30 minutes and I'll tell you exactly how it's going to end. I already know it. I already
Nothing
know.
surprises you.
Yeah, nothing surprises me. I think about the most recent Bond movie. I was like, oh, he's going to die at the end of this. And I was like, no, he's not. At the end of it, she's like, okay, please stop doing that. And it's because I feel like if you're not trying to approach the medium from the most relatable aspect, you're not doing your job. And the first two films are not relatable, except, the thought of losing a friend, that's terrible. I lost, like we've all lost a friend to death or a family member or whatever. That's terrible. And especially,
we didn't even talk about Kirk's eulogy speech. I mean, that was touching.
It was,
that was Shatner's finest moment.
It really was. That moment
when he stumbles on that human.
Yeah, whenever he talks about the most human.
Yeah.
It's being human is knowing the right thing to do, but being too much of a bitch, basically, to not do it. And we all do it. But Spock didn't. And that's why everyone loves Spock, is because Spock was going to tell you, this is a bad decision. This isn't no, we're not doing this. This isn't logical. And I'm sorry, the logical explanation is always the best one. I'm sorry. The logical explanation is always the best path. Truly. However, it doesn't always guarantee success. In the moment, it is always the best path. The path of logic. But it doesn't necessarily guarantee success.
Or happiness.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's like, logically, whenever it comes down to being a number, logic wins out every time.
And that was the beauty of Wrath of Khan, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one. That was the point that Spock was making, sacrificing himself. And now here at the end of this movie, Kirk turns that phrase on him.
The needs of the one.
The needs of the one outweigh the needs of the many. And it bookends. These two movies bookend each other brilliantly. And you really can't have one without the other at this point.
I can't think of a better set of movies that accompany each other better. The only movies that come to mind are Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2. That's the only thing. Those are some of my favorite. One of my favorite stories of all time is Kill Bill. But these two movies, I mean, name another series that has a sequel to it, and the sequel is not equally as good, but equally as impactful as the first movie. Whether it be for positive or negative.
Yeah, no, I'd have to think on that for a little bit.
There's not many movies that have,
Lost World, Jurassic Park. That was a pretty good follow-up. No, I can't even get through that sentence.
Okay, I was gonna say, I was like, dude, if you're gonna bring up the Jurassic World movies,
not Jurassic World, Jurassic Park. The second.
Oh,
the second
yeah, okay.
Goldblum.
But we had a third one. We had a third one.
I know. It ruins it.
Is it really that bad still?
No.
We need to revisit
We can argue
those.
that another
time.
We need to revisit.
Yeah, we need to review
okay.
those.
Yeah,
we need to go to the bulletin board. Here's my thing. I watch a lot of movies, Ethan. I go to the theater a lot every week. I go to the theater a couple times a week sometimes. And I'll tell you, I love doing that. I watch a lot of movies, Ethan. I can't think of a better part 1 and part 2. The only thing that I can think, literally, of the most recent media that I've consumed have been video games. God of War 1 and God of War Ragnarok.
Yeah.
I can literally not think of a better story that is, it's like the Star Wars trilogy, but in 2 movies. And to me, it's like, I'm all in. Like, after we get done with this conversation, I'm going to watch the next one. Like, I'm in that mindset. Like, I want to know what happens next. Like, because guess what? I want to watch the original series and the next generation. Like, I want to see what happens.
Ladies and gentlemen, we greatly appreciate you sticking with us here on Wannabe Critic podcast, keeping it real. And while Gabe empties his bladder, I just want to say thank you for listening.
Were you shocked that I actually liked this movie?
I actually kind of am. Yeah. Dude, I am stoked to hear your thoughts on the next movie. I really am.
Dude, I love
I'm not saying that disparagingly. I love 4. It's a great movie, but it as different as Wrath of Khan was from the motion picture, Star Trek 4 is diametrically or 180 degrees from anything you've seen in any of the movies so far.
4
it's a different movie altogether.
And what's the one that like everybody hates? 5? Everyone hates 5, right?
5. Everyone hates 5.
What's the name of that one? The year we make what is it?
The Final Frontier.
Final Frontier. Okay, gotcha. And that's the one Brandon hates.
No. Brandon loves that one.
You hate that
that's
one.
The reality is I don't hate it now as much as I did. It is my least favorite of the original series.
Okay. All right. Continue with your thought.
We'll get there.
Okay.
I finished the thought.
Oh, you finished it.
I was gonna say, okay. Yeah, dude, I am so stoked to hear you say that because I am really looking forward to the conversation that we have on Star Trek 4 because for all of the things you love about this one and it being a continuation of the story that we got in Wrath of Khan and how different Wrath of Khan was from motion picture, 4 is yet again kicking it into a different gear and telling the story, but from a completely different perspective yet again. And how they were able to do that throughout the 80s and keep it fresh. It's kind of a feat. And like I said, I look forward to hearing from you when we talk about this one.
I just think about so it's from a new perspective. So George R.R. Martin, do you know who this is?
Yes.
Okay.
Game of Thrones.
He tried to write for Star Trek at one point. And I think he actually did write one episode of Star Trek. But his entire stuff is built off of multiple perspective, like viewing it from every angle. So if you're telling me from a film aspect that this is going to be from a different angle, the shift from 2 to 3 could be, if Caleb was on this podcast, he would say that was jarring. Because it is. It is a shift from, it's like, wow, we are really in a completely different gear. And, dude, my hat is off to Leonard Nimoy because this is the best directed movie that I have seen so far in the Star Trek universe out of the first 3.
Nick Meyer would be offended to hear you say that.
Nick Meyer, the director for Star Trek 2.
Second one. Yeah.
He did a good job. This is a at least from the modern perspective, because remember, I'm young. I'm 27. You put these 2 movies in front of an audience today, they're going to like the third one more, I promise. I don't even have to do the social experiment to know what the numbers would be. The people would like this movie more, for sure.
Yeah.
Do you know why? Because
not myself, but yeah.
So Spock dying is a huge moment in the second movie. Obviously, it is the moment in that movie. If you don't care about the crew, I don't care about Spock dying. I'm just going to say it like it does nothing for me. Don't care. It's a good moment between Kirk and Spock, but from an emotional level, for me personally, it's objectively I can look at that moment and be like, oh yeah, that's an important moment. But the only real emotion I feel is the thought of Kirk losing Spock. It's not Spock being gone.
Yeah.
So unless you're a fan of the series, I just feel like that moment can kind of fall flat potentially, because by and large, I feel like they made the first 2 movies for the core audience, right? So for this third movie, it's evident that this entire project was made for a wider net, a wider audience.
Yeah. And
it's not a knock. It's not a bad thing to be formulaic. It's okay to have a formulaic action sci-fi movie or just sci-fi movie with elements of nuance and action in it. And I feel like, dare I say, this movie does that almost perfectly. The nuance between the action and the actual, there's just this really fine line between like the people that love Star Trek, like the fandom itself, the actual message of like, we're not going anywhere, like we're going somewhere with the original crew. Who knows what will happen next? And just the execution, dude, like of making it a solid blockbuster movie.
Yeah.
Like,
well, and the nice thing is they allowed Leonard Nimoy to cut his teeth with this movie, and then they brought him back to direct the next one too.
I can't wait
which
to see.
I think is a coup. It was a coup for the series. Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, there were things with. You can totally see his hand because with Vulcan culture specifically, I can totally see Spock being like, Vulcans wouldn't do that, or being like
he was famous for doing that on set.
Yeah, like being like, no, this isn't right. I just remember it's like the moment where like they're having their ritual and it's like nothing would make sense unless you were Vulcan. That's the whole point. Mm-hmm. The whole point is not being able to understand Vulcan culture because you as a human being have emotion. Vulcans do not.
Yeah. You're not supposed to equate yourself with them.
Exactly. Yeah. Like they have their own thing going on. The idea of being alien yet superior, dare I say, at the same time, it shouldn't be attainable. It shouldn't be understandable. It's like the idea of Vulcans being superior, it's like, yeah, as human beings, you shouldn't understand what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
And to me, that is beautiful because that is what humans cannot achieve. Humans cannot achieve the undecipherable. We have too much at our fingertips right now. So it's like the idea of there actually being a race that's superior to us, mentally, physically, whatever. I love that. I love the idea of bettering yourself.
Yeah.
And it's incredible.
And that is why Star Trek is enduring. Because you're watching people that are the best of what they do. And all they do is perform at the top level. Yep. And that's not something that we are familiar with in our day-to-day lives.
No.
We don't perform. We don't do our jobs to the very best of our ability, day in, day out, every day. And execute.
Yep.
And Star Trek show was shown. That was the whole reason Gene Roddenberry presented it in the 60s the way he did. It was humanity when they were at their best and dealing with alien races and alien cultures and alien concepts at their best and showing what could be. We don't get that today, which is why Star Trek still kind of resonates with a lot of people, even being 40 and 50 and 60 years old.
It's one of those things. It's like if Star Wars was to be that thing that connected everybody on a, and I can even equate Star Wars to being like Harry Potter. Harry Potter was a very culturally moving thing and connected a lot of people. That is the whole point. If Star Wars did it on a fantastical level, because let's be real, Star Wars, it has elements of sci-fi, but it's fantasy.
Oh, it's full fantasy.
It is full on fantasy. And to anyone say
it is Dungeons and Dragons in space.
It is. It's that's all it is. Like whenever now I'm having an epiphany. I'm like, wow, Star Wars is not sci-fi. Star Trek is. With a little bit of fantasy. The idea of being able to continue after death, like that is just such an appealing concept to the general mass populace, except for people that are okay with just the life they live. Me being one of them, it's like, if this is all I ever get to do, that's great. But the idea of there being more from someone who will appreciate it, that's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And it's incredible how deeply impactful these stories can be for people. And if I would have been alive around this time, the same age I am now, experiencing this movie for the first time, back in the day, it would have been like, wow,
Well,
You did this. You did this for the fans. I mean, I really believe you did this movie for the fans, or tried to.
Picture yourself. You've always. You and I have had a lot of discussions about Star Wars over the years.
Yes.
And when I've tried to discuss it in terms of how it relates to Star Trek, you've never been able to relate. Now, this is a movie that came out a year after Return of the Jedi. And so now, having seen this movie and what the fandom would have been like in 1984 between Star Trek and Star Wars, do you see why there would be a difference between the two?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's the thing that I've been trying to relate, but have not been able to connect with.
Star Trek was for nerds who were okay with growing up.
Yeah.
Star Wars was not. Star Wars was for people who wanted to buy into the idea that like this.
You didn't have to move forward.
Exactly. You didn't have to move forward. Like the idea of being like, we'll never get here, that was okay. Whereas Star Trek does the complete opposite. Like, no. Here's the thing. We will get here. We will have spaceships. We will do this thing.
Holy crap. It's just making me realize what some of my issue with current Star Wars is. It's not moving forward.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's stagnant. And say what you want about Star Trek. It can be boring. It can be one-dimensional. It can be borderline stagecraft. And if you do not like stagecraft, you will not like Star Trek. Period. Yeah. I'm sorry. Like, if you do not like actually going to see plays, you will not like Star Trek.
Yeah.
I genuinely believe that. Like, there have been many a play that I have seen where I'm like, oh, like, I'm glad I'm here at the theater, but I didn't actually enjoy it. I watched. We went and saw Aladdin a couple months ago. Like it is a Broadway traveling troupe performing Aladdin. There were elements of the show that I really appreciated, but I was like, this wasn't for me. Like, I don't know. You can't watch this movie specifically and say like, oh, this wasn't intended for the fans, because every single element is aimed at revitalizing any fire that is left within the series, which many people at this time are wanting more. And this has more impact than Wrath of Khan. But it can't exist without Wrath of Khan.
No, absolutely not.
So, to me, it has more impact because it's like Spock is back. And I really relate to Kirk on a lot of levels because I don't want confrontation. I don't seek confrontation. But whenever it comes up, I'd like to know that I'm 5 steps ahead of the other guy so that I can win. And that feels like Kirk to me.
God, that is Kirk.
Kirk is like, we're just going to ride this out. See what happens. But whenever it comes down to it, there is no room for not being smarter than the other guy.
Yeah.
And I think that's just incredible we spent all this time talking about Spock. We haven't even talked about Kirk.
Yeah.
Kirk in this movie. I mean, he is a force to be reckoned with. I mean, like,
yeah. Well, it can be summed. James T. Kirk can be summed up in what McCoy says to him when they're standing there watching the demise of the Enterprise. He says, "You just do what you always do: turn death into a fighting chance to live." That's the line from the movie. And that is James T. Kirk. We talked a lot in the last movie about his reaction to the Kobayashi Maru scenario. He never faced a no-win situation. No, he does every day. He puts his life on the line. He faces the no-win scenario. He just has that, I'm a badass.
Yeah.
And I know I'm going to be able to handle it.
Yeah.
And that's what he does.
Yeah, it's like the farmer mentality. Like,
yeah,
it is quite literally the farmer mentality. It's like, well, I'm going to go out here. I can't tell you how many times I've been rushed by a bull or being like, I don't know what I'm about to do, but here I am. I'm about to handle this.
I have to handle this.
Exactly.
Failure is not an option.
Failure is not an option. I have to handle this. I have to handle my business here.
Mm-hmm.
And that is James T. Kirk in a nutshell. And I love it. I love it how James T. Kirk is literally, if you're a Bible nerd, it's like he's literally Peter. And Spock is almost like Jesus. It's like, whoa, just slow your roll a little bit. Like, just chill out. Let's think logically here, not with, what feels like the right thing in this moment. But God bless James T. Kirk. And
so who's McCoy? Is he John? He feels. He's got a connection there.
John, I feel like McCoy feels multiple sides. I mean, he did have Spock's mind there with him that whole time. God bless McCoy, honestly. And I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Carl Urban puts old McCoy to shame.
Yeah. We're talking about DeForest Kelley in his 70s at this point.
Well, he needs to go away. I hope he's not in the next film. I hope he's passed on by the next film because it did nothing for me. I'm like, man, there's a triad
You are
here.
going to, I will stop you now. You are going to regret having said that after you watch 4.
We'll see.
Yeah, you're going to regret it. DeForest Kelley has his moments. They're coming. Trust me.
You better be certain.
Oh, I am. Because I've always loved McCoy. And Carl Urban does a great job.
He's
with
so
the
good.
Character. He does a good bones.
I'm a Carl Urban stan, though.
Yeah, okay. But I love me some DeForest Kelley, and he's got some moments coming up. So
okay,
it'll happen.
All right.
We'll talk about it.
All right.
We'll talk about it. You need to watch 4. We need to do another podcast.
It's going to happen. Here we are. Who knows? God knows when this is going to come out. I have no idea. I don't care.
Yeah.
I'm here in the moment. We're recording. I'm doing my thing. You're doing your thing.
Yeah.
I don't know when this is coming out. It could be December of 2023. I don't know. It could be December of 2024.
Let's hope not.
If it's not, I mean, if it is, that's pretty sad. But I mean, if it, whatever. All I can say is like, I'm invigorated to watch. I'm invigorated to continue this series with you.
Okay.
This just feels so full circle. I feel like we're in Studio A right now.
I've got warm and fuzzies hearing you say that because for years I've tried to get you to.
I'm sorry.
Connect with Star Trek on some level, and I've never been able to get through to you. I'm so glad that it's happened.
It's just like Tarantino movies. Okay. You just don't realize what you're in for until you start.
Yep.
And sometimes it's not the right time. But right now, it's hitting me at a time where I'm like, man, I just want good dialogue.
There you go.
And that's what Star Trek is, man. It is good, meaningful dialogue, and God bless them all, is all I have to say.
There's only a few of them left, so
yeah.
As unfortunate as that is,
at least Shatner has actually been in space.
He has.
And I have to say,
and
watching
Scotty's in space currently. James Doohan.
Oh, okay.
His ashes are up there. They launched him into space.
Oh,
so.
Well, he's probably to Pluto by now, but I have to say, this is a really cool full circle moment for me because there's once you enter your late 20s, early 30s, I'm starting to realize once you've established what your things are, that's what they are.
There's not a whole lot of new that comes
There's
along.
not a whole lot of new, and guess what? I just don't have the capacity to give much things a chance. If it doesn't grab me immediately or already have some sort of, pedigree of any kind attached to it, you're going to have to try really hard to impress me because me being an individual, I get to say whether this thing is good or not. You made it, I get the choice to say whether it's good or not. I get to contribute to the mass populace opinion, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I can at least be happy that Star Trek exists because there's not many new things that come out that I'm actually excited for. And it's an absolute joy to go back to things that feel like they should have been a part of my life growing up. And I really only have you to thank for that because my parents, they weren't Star Trek people. I have no Star Trek people in my life except for you. So here we are. This is a very special project for me, Ethan. I'm glad this is happening. I wanted to do this project. I was like, you know what? Me and Ethan have been friends a long time. Like, we both love the podcast. This could be cool. Never did in a million years that I actually think I would actually become a fan of Star Trek and
that you would actually connect with it. On
like
some
I
level.
want to have those discussions about the newer series with you. Like For all of our disagreements on Star Wars, like, because I want to say this, like, for the record, there are things that you're wrong about, but there are things that I'm wrong about too.
Yeah.
It evens out, and that's the beauty of Star Wars. I want to go into Star Trek having many things that we have in common. Being like, whoa, you like that movie too? Like, we're literally having an organic moment of, you like this thing? Because I thought you were going to hate this movie, Ethan.
Yeah. No. Star Trek 3?
Yes.
No,
but
I've always
I never knew
had
that.
a love for this movie.
And if I knew it, I didn't care at the time. But now it's like, we now have that in common. Imagine like agreeing on The Last Jedi. That's literally what's happened here with the search for Spock.
Yeah. Well, no, like I said, I have thoroughly enjoyed the ride so far. I'm really looking forward to hearing your opinions on 4 and continuing the ride with you. So
it's gonna happen, Ethan. It's gonna happen.
There it is.
Well, an hour and 33 minutes later, ladies and gentlemen, probably less than that if you actually check your timestamp, because now there's like several pee breaks in there. But we've come to the end of our discussion of the search for Spock.
Yeah.
And for
Join the search, people. Join the search.
Join the search
watch
with
it
us.
If you haven't
watch it. If you have not watched it, watch all 3 movies. Because I really
catch up. Yeah.
Very rarely do you ever see movies that just do such a good job of building on top of what's existent.
Yeah.
And call me crazy. Characterily, I just don't see many things like this. This is unique. Every once in a while, a movie come out, like the new Star Trek movies, it's like, oh, they evidently did this just for money. There's no guarantee that this movie succeeds in 1983, 84, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
This is a gamble. In my book, if I'm an executive and I'm like, okay, Wrath of Khan did good, whatever. There's something here. There's something still here. What are we going to do about it? This is a gamble. And it succeeds.
Yeah.
And it's incredible because whoever, obviously, I'm a creative, just like you. You've done things, that have paid you, creatively. And of, like monetarily, obviously, like you've done things and it's like, oh, that was creative, but like I got paid for it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't ever do it just for the money.
No.
That is a bonus. You do it for the art. And as someone who appreciates art and the deeper meanings behind, many things, that's like, to me, this is just like, this is a very important movie for me. It's like, I just see, like, that Spock narrative, like what I was saying about, being adolescent. The worst time of my entire life. And as Spock is rapidly aging, trying to deal with all these things happening around him, it's like, well, who am I? Where am I? What is happening? That really struck a chord with me. Whether it was intentional or not, that's what I got out of it. It's like the feeling of moving forward, whether you want to or not.
Mm-hmm.
There are moments in my life.
And it being painful at times.
Yes.
Yeah.
There are moments in my life where I wish I could just freeze. It's like I'm playing an old game right now. And like, I can see I'm only playing it because of like the serotonin it gives me. It's like I can imagine, and the nostalgia, it's like I can imagine those moments of like, oh, I know where I was the first time I heard this music, or I saw this thing, or whatever.
Oh, music. James Horner again.
Oh my God.
Great
dude.
score for this movie.
The score is good whenever Krug and Kirk are fighting. And the fighting is not cool at all. Like I could, like I could for sure whoop William Shatner's ass. In 1983.
It's TV. It's TV.
It is.
Level.
It is TV. But you know what? That's what makes it endearing. Is because the clips I've seen of the original series, it's like this literally looks like a grandiose version of something that I fell in love with.
Kirk's throwing punches, trying to do it the same way he did in the 60s.
Yes, and but it works.
Yeah. Well, it's the same character.
It's the same,
and you see it.
It's the same character, and that's why I think about like these, these new Marvel movies with all of these B characters, it's like, that's not the same guy that I saw 2 movies ago. Like, I don't buy it. I buy it here. And, like, the music being one key attribute of this, it does not hit the same way without it. It is so powerful. Like, it is a really good and important component to this movie. Now, I have one final question, though. You know, I was talking about, like, teaching music and, like, how important music is and yada. Like, do you think... What do you think, like, the negative things are about this movie? Like, why do people dislike this movie? Why didn't this unite the Star Trek fan base?
Well, I think from this, like I alluded to earlier.
Well, hold on 1 second.
Biggest...
1 second. I want to preface this. Okay. I feel like this is the only best way to say it. I preface this. I want to give context. Like, The Last Jedi, if you love The Last Jedi, I know why you love it. But it's kind of the same type of deal. Like, it's not a great movie. Like, it's not. I'm sorry. But if you love it for specific reasons, I understand what those reasons are, because they're the only reasons to like that movie, if that makes sense. And I feel like that kind of falls into this category a little bit of why people might love this movie, or, you know, a select group of fans. Right. And that's why I wanted to preface that, is like, I don't love The Last Jedi because it's a good movie. I love The Last Jedi because it made Luke Skywalker feel real to me. Yeah. And it made sense to me. And I feel like with a lot of things with this movie, it makes sense to me. And I have to ask, like, what were the main reasons? What were the main arguments where people was like, no, this isn't Star Trek. Like, this isn't the thing. Like, you know, enlighten me.
Well, it very much is the thing that I alluded to earlier. The difference in the Klingons. The Klingons had been the mustache-twirling villains coming up with schemes and things to foil Kirk and the Enterprise and crew. And in this one, people looked at the Klingons and thought, well, they're just brutes. That's all they are. And yeah, they kind of are. And then as you see them in Next Generation and in later iterations, you understand the motivations behind it. You get a little bit more backstory. But people thought it was too much of a shift in the culture. And if I had been a teenager watching Star Trek on television and then a 30 or 40-year-old watching this movie, I might have been in that same camp. Because Lord knows I had my problems with the sequel trilogy for Star Wars when it came out in my 30s and 40s, because it was so tonally different. Well, for a lot of the fans, that was the problem. It was tonally different than what they had been used to. And so this movie didn't strike with all the fandom in the way that, you know, you would hope that it would. So that's the best explanation I can give for it.
That's really unfortunate.
It kind of is.
I so desperately wish you liked The Last Jedi for the same reasons that I like it, Ethan.
But I don't.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, an hour and 42 minutes later, we are actually done with our review now.
Okay.
I feel like I've gushed enough. I'm ready to play some video games now. I've had a few drinks. This is the wannabe critic in his prime. You know what I mean? Like, this is like, yes, in his element. Like, you know, I got to have a shot or two before I make a video, because, you know, that inspiration may not come to me. So if I've said anything tonight, ladies and gentlemen, that has offended you, I'm not sorry.
You've done your job.
Yeah, I did my job. I'm not sorry, and you can quit listening anytime you want, the 15 of you. I'm more than happy to make that 14, because guess what? We don't do this for you. Just so you know, we do it for us. Yeah. So if you don't like The Last Jedi or The Search for Spock, you can screw right off. How about that? You know what I mean? No.
Okay. Well, I'll log off now.
Okay. Ethan, it's been great having you be a part of Wannabe Critic Productions.
Everybody, thanks for watching, listening, whatever you've been doing.
This is a dinosaur. Ethan.
This is my last show here.
Ethan and I, you know, Ethan has some good thoughts, but he's just misdirected. He was misdirected as a child. It's a big... No, I'm just kidding. I'm just joking.
Yeah.
In all seriousness, I'm incredibly excited to be going into this with you further, and I cannot wait for the what's the next one called?
The Voyage Home.
The Voyage Home. Okay, very
Yes.
good. So it's almost like we're ignoring the first film altogether and just making this like a trilogy, kind of.
It really is. Yeah.
I mean, it is.
This is all 2, 3, and 4 are very much the original trilogy of the Star Trek movies. Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, it's time for me to see what happens next, and I'm going to play some games and probably do that. So
Okay.
here we go.
Pay
Ethan.
attention, though. There's some subtlety to it, but anyway,
Ethan, we just talked for an
enjoy
hour and 45 minutes about something that I guarantee you this conversation went places that you didn't expect.
Mm-hmm.
Because there were things that whenever I was drafting, my thought process for this whole entire episode, I was like, I'm going to bring things up that Ethan is not expecting. And I fully went into this review. I fully went into this review expecting you to think that I hated this movie. So, and here we are, an hour and 45 minutes later. Yeah, here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, Ethan Maestri, the second half of this particular review. It was an absolute pleasure to have you here, my friend, as usual.
Thank you for inviting me. I
yes,
appreciate it.
I'm very excited to continue. I was excited before, but now I'm very excited. So here we go. Stay tuned until next time, ladies and gentlemen, because the very next episode will be The Voyage Home. Say goodbye, Ethan.
Live long and prosper.
I do it too.